Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kevin Klowden. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Regional Economics at the Milken Institute, and I am thrilled to be discussing today what I consider to be an incredibly pertinent topic in the middle of one of the greatest global disruptions that we have had in 100 years. It's a tremendous combination of the world's largest and most impactful pandemic, certainly since the Spanish flu. But for this panel in particular, what we are looking at is the issue of competitiveness, production, and logistics in this disrupted world. And as we focus on and consider the number of different issues that we are facing today, we have to realize that in a globally interconnected world, a world where manufacturing, logistics, transportation, issues of services, issues of basic support, whether it is food, whether it is your phone, whether it is your parts for your car, whether it is something as important as your personal protective equipment, your masks, your gloves, the various things you have and need for going out and working in this environment, that this is a tremendous challenge and a tremendous level of disruption. This session is going to discuss not only the challenges that we have faced this year, but the challenges that we are facing in terms of reorganizing, restructuring, manufacturing, logistics, retail, and various other ways to deal with the fact that just in time, which we all really rely on in this modern world, is a much greater challenge than we thought. How do we adapt? How do we move forward? And how do we keep our essential industries, whether they are large, whether they are small, open and functioning? And how do we achieve essentially a semblance of normal in the middle of this pandemic and then afterwards? This session is going to be talking about a number of these different issues. Quite honestly, we have so much to talk about. We won't get to all of it today, but I am joined by an excellent group of panelists today. These panelists include Ian McKay, CEO of Investment Canada, Jay Timmons, who is President and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers, Maria Contreras-Sweet, who is Chairman and CEO of Rockway Equity Partners and former Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, and having some technical issues and soon to rejoin us is Rajesh Subramaniam, who is President and Chief Operating Officer of FedEx Corporation. So what I would like to do to start everything off is to ask some opening questions. Fortunately, I was planning to start with Jay, who's already on with us, so I can direct the first question to you, Jay, which is, you represent manufacturing in America. From your perspective, how does the economy look and how did we get here?
Well, good afternoon from the East Coast, good morning on the West Coast, and good day around the world, everybody. Kevin, great question. Obviously, no one planned for this year. Things were going just fine up until the pandemic hit and we found ourselves in quarantine, and so many businesses had to make some pretty significant changes in how we were operating. From the manufacturing side, we're actually doing pretty well. That's the good news. We had a pretty big hit right at the beginning. We had a tremendous loss of jobs. 1.3 million jobs were lost in the first few months of the pandemic, but we've recovered about 650,000 of those. Also on the good news side, our members of the National Association of Manufacturers report, about 66% of them, 2/3, report a positive outlook for their company in the third quarter. And now that's up from just 34% in the second quarter. And that was the worst reading that we had seen since the Great Recession. It's still a little bit under the historic average of about 74%. So we have a ways to go in getting that confidence back. On the revenue side, about 2/3 expect their firm's revenue aren't going to get up to pre-COVID levels until 2021 or later. Only about 17% say their revenues are already recovered, and 12% say they're not going to bounce back by the end of the year. So they've been through a lot. Output has plunged. It's come back a bit, but but we are seeing some good signs. But here's the problem, Kevin, and I know we'll get into this a little bit later. We cannot fully recover as a sector or as an economy if we are not doing everything possible to protect ourselves and to protect our people from the spread of COVID. And that means very simple things like PPE, wearing PPE, social distancing, and not gathering in large groups. Manufacturers have been pushing that message literally since early February. And I'm really proud of the work that the manufacturing sector has done in keeping our workers safe and trying to keep our communities safe. But we need everybody in this country to be doing the same thing, or we will never get this economy back to where it needs to be.
Absolutely. And I cannot emphasize how much I agree with that statement more. Fundamentally, we need people to behave in a way that they are thinking long term. They're thinking about the economy, about each other. And that's a theme that we are going to continue throughout this panel and in the discussions. So, Ian, reshoring has become one of the great topics, even before the pandemic, in the middle of all the different disputes and everything else that was going on and the realignments. How is reshoring and reorganization of supply chains accelerated, and what are the limitations?
Well, first of all, thank you, Kevin, and thanks to the entire Milken group for putting on this panel and for the invitation. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be on the panel with Rajesh and Maria and Jay. To the question of reshoring, as you alluded to, reshoring has been a topic, it's been a word that's been talked about over years and decades, in fact, kind of sporadically when there were bilateral trade tensions or waves of protectionism or some geopolitical shifts in economic might. But the reshoring word appeared obviously every day upon the pandemic hitting the world. And it was almost like, the tide went out suddenly, and the tide went out and it hasn't come back yet. And so a lot of countries, national governments, multinational companies are all trying to look at where they're vulnerable as a result of the pandemic. So the notion of reshoring has become urgent. And I think it became urgent early in the days of the pandemic, specifically to PPE, to personal protective equipment. Who had the capacity to rely on themselves to have it? In many cases, pharmaceuticals, medicines. There were some vulnerabilities exposed in many, many different countries. And even food supply was impacted. So governments around the world had a really hard look, and they were forced to look at where they were vulnerable. And some were able to effectively do some immediate work to reshore some of those very, very important things. In Canada's case, and as an example, we determined that up until March, Canada only produced about 0.5% of all the PPE that we used on a daily basis. The government really shifted very, very prominently and issued a call to action to companies and to see if we couldn't develop some of that supply chain capacity domestically. And I know this happened in the United States as well. But in the past 7 months, Canada has retooled, reskilled, and got to a level where 70% of the PPE now is domestically supplied. So that's the urgent, immediate reshoring. There are limitations to broader reshoring of other sectors that are a little more complicated, a little more complex. And I know we'll get into that later in the discussion. But there were issues where countries were vulnerable. They acted quickly. And certainly in our case, we were able to solve the pharmaceutical and the PPE issue very, very quickly.
Which is great to know and great to see. Now, as we are still dealing with some technical issues, Jay, I'm coming back to you with another question, and we'll go back to Maria and Rajesh when they're able to reconnect. So that the issue of PPE is absolutely very prominent, and one of the things in connection to that we alluded to early on in your comments and more broadly is that why did worker and workplace safety present such a major issue at the start of the pandemic? What could have been done then? What was done to overcome that, particularly for manufacturers and even more broadly? And what can and should be done differently now?
You're talking about safety measures, Kevin?
I'm not talking about safety measures. I'm talking about being awareness of protecting workers, various things that in what you talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, no, and it's a great question. And I think it's a fundamental question we're going to have to keep answering literally every day. We have not had a uh, consistent set of guidelines or messaging from the federal government, which I think is so incredibly important when you're dealing with something of this magnitude. Um, we know what science tells us. I mean, manufacturers are all about science, and we know what science tells us. Science tells us that this particular virus transmits so much more efficiently than anything we've seen since the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu, which you mentioned earlier. And because it is so virulent, we have to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't spread. Now, we know this is not a common cold. In fact, right before this panel presentation began, I was reading some information from some millennials who are, quote unquote, the long haulers. They're facing long-term disabilities that are going to impact their quality of life for many years, if not for the rest of their life. These are also folks who have found themselves in our hospitals and our medical facilities. And in some cases, early in the pandemic, and we're starting to see this happen again, those facilities are being overwhelmed. And so cases that we would be treating on a regular basis, whether it's cancer, not of COVID, but of other issues like cancer, diabetes, other ailments that we would want to make sure that we had access to a hospital or medical facility for. Oftentimes, those aren't possible. I've had a health issue in my own family that required an inordinate amount of hospital time, and it became almost impossible during this pandemic. And I've just seen it firsthand, and it's frightening. I have 3 children at home, school-age children. They're down in the basement right now. So if you hear some noise, you're going to know what it's all about. So our schools are closed, our hospitals are overwhelmed, our businesses are failing. When Maria gets back on, I'm sure she will talk about the fact that 170,000 small businesses have closed, 100,000 of those permanently. That is what a lack of adherence to any type of consistent safety measures does to our economy. Manufacturers are really proud, again, that we started this process early, that we sent the message. This is the way that we protect ourselves. This is the way we protect others. This is the way we protect our communities and our economy. But everybody, and I mean everybody, has to be in it together, or it just won't matter.
Absolutely. Ian, how were things particularly implemented? You talked about the reshoring of PPE, but also just in terms of what Jay's talking about, safety measures and keeping the economy open. What has Canada done well? What do you think that it could be potentially doing differently? And given the fact that right now I can't go to Canada without a couple-week quarantine, how is that affected in terms of some of the international connections that are so important to supply chains in the midst of this?
Yeah, it's a super good question. There's so many ways we can go with that. Obviously, starting with there is nothing more important, as Jay alluded to, than the health and safety of individuals in any country, in every country. That's just the first step that everybody needs to take. And one of the reasons for that importance is that you can't get an economic recovery and you can't have people interacting and supply chains returning to some sense of normalcy if people can't go to work. Now, one of the consequences, of course, of that pandemic, with people not being allowed to move about and be in factories or in supply chain locations, is there's an acceleration of digitization in supply chains. There's an acceleration of automation. There's an acceleration in the use of robots, and so jurisdictions that have capacity, the technical capacity, the skills capacity, including a focus on AI, on blockchain, on AR and VR, all those technologies that are working their way into the supply chain have been accelerated. And certainly in our case, we're seeing some global investment capital shifting to our jurisdictions because we do have certain strengths in AI and VR and AR, the things that are going to be accelerated into supply chains globally.
Hey, Kevin,
Great.
can I just point out that um, first and foremost, Ian, we hope a lot of that investment happens in the United States as well. But kudos to you for kudos to Canada for really focusing on the need to really strengthen your own supply chain. But what I will say is, thankfully, we have gotten the USMCA finalized, so that we have these good relationships between our North American trading partners in case another issue like this arises in the future. That's why these trade agreements are so vital. And Ian, thank you for all you all did on that. We're really pleased at what manufacturers contributed here, and our partners in Mexico as well. That'll really matter for issues like this in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, indeed. And if I could just, Kevin, respond, the USMCA is really part of the fabric and the DNA of Canada's competitiveness. And we're so delighted that that has been resolved. And it speaks to the broader point of, in terms of global free trade access and trade corridor infrastructure, absolutely key attributes to solving supply chain adjustments when they happen, and inevitably they will happen.
Right.
Indeed, they will. Now, speaking of supply chains, even if video is a slight issue, we are thrilled to have Rajesh back with us. So, Rajesh, if you're ready, I was going to ask you a key question that I think ties into this, is that as an essential business in the pandemic, what operational challenges have faced both you as FedEx and your clients, and what lessons have you learned that are going to be essential for us going forward?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me, and I'm not sure what exactly happened on the video. I can actually see you all, but nonetheless, yeah, thank you for the question, and thanks for inviting me to part of this great panel. It's from the very get-go, FedEx has been on the front lines of this pandemic, and when the virus started spreading in China, we were moving a lot of PPEs to China, and then essentially as it went globally, we started moving a lot of PPEs from China to the rest of the world. In effect, we have, just to give you an example, we have moved about 1.8 billion masks in this time frame. The airlift from China to the rest of the world would be the equivalent of the airlift after the 1948 Berlin airlift. There's like so much PPEs and healthcare-related products and test kits and all those things were moving on our network. And it was in a very we were from the very get-go. I wish to say that I was very, very proud of the FedEx team members around the world who really did an outstanding job, really a core of who we are and what we do. And as this evolved over time, clearly we had operational challenges operating in a network of 700 airplanes and 180,000 motorized vehicles around the world in different formats. But again, those were just, in fact, some of them were ad hoc, some of them changed daily, operational requirements, and so on and so forth. And the ability for us to flex our network was very important. The fact that we already have a network in place and we were able to add nodes to the network on a reasonably quick time frame was very, very important for us to be able to connect the globe. So that's really critical. And then, more on a more lighter note, the fact that as people started working from home, then of course we saw a surge in e-commerce, and then now we're delivering more and more packages to people working from home as well. So we've had in a very interesting few months here, moving a lot of healthcare equipment, a lot of healthcare material around the world, and then of course now dealing with e-commerce shifts.
Kevin, can I just say to Rajesh, first of all, thank you for everything that FedEx has done during this pandemic to help relocate PPE from around the world. We spent a lot of time working with the federal government trying to locate with FEMA and also state governors to try to locate PPE in our facilities and other locations around the world and get it to those hot zones, especially in the early days of the pandemic. Gina Adams in your DC office, Rajesh, is just best of the best. She was able to help secure transport for a lot of these pieces of PPE to various locations in this country. And we just can't thank you and other carriers as well for just diving in to literally save America during this time of crisis. It was really amazing to watch.
I appreciate you saying that, Jay, and I think you're 100% right. Gina is a superstar for us, and but we also have a lot of other superstars around the world who have made this happen. And I think we realized the fact that the ability for us to pick up something in one part of the world and put it down in another part of the world in 1 or 2 days is something that's comes in very, very handy in these circumstances. So again, I appreciate you saying that.
Rajesh, it's interesting you mentioned the Berlin airlift. Years and years ago, I had the chance to actually visit the airport in Berlin, in Tempelhof, which was the main site of the airlift, and they had a statue up commemorating it. And it'd be interesting, it would actually be great that if at some point we can have a statue up in Memphis to commemorate how much of a role was done in this regard for you.
I don't know about my statue. I think statue is a FedEx airplane will be more like it.
Well, it would certainly make the kids happy. Let's put it that way. But that actually does bring something up also, and we've been talking about this with PPE and shifting things, that from a competitiveness and logistics standpoint, we do need to talk about the global side of things, that we, even with reshoring and with regionalization, it is worth asking for each of you is that how essential is China and Chinese manufacturing? It was certainly essential in terms of some of the PPE supplies early on. It's certainly essential in terms of a number of the components and supply chains. And if it's not China, if there's regionalization, whether it's to Canada, Mexico, the US, or it's to Southeast Asia or elsewhere, how much can things realign and shift in this environment? It's a question for all of you. So if Jay, if you want to start.
Happy to jump in. It's a real question. We've spoken about the immediacy of reshoring things like PPE or food supply or medicines, but of course global supply chains go through every sphere of the economy, and frankly, China's become a bit of a juggernaut in its logistics and supply chain capacity. We are, as consumers, addicted to just-in-time, highly sophisticated supply chains at the lowest cost. That has been the priority. We're now looking at what are the limitations to reshoring and what are the opportunities that certain regions could have and should have to either complement or maybe take some market share away from that part of Asia. Clearly, they have enormous investments in technology, 5G capacity. They have enormous investments in talent and people, and of course, proximity to the largest population zone in the world. But there are opportunities, certainly in the North American context, for food supply chains to be enhanced by AI and free trade corridors, opportunities in clean tech, essentially based on the fact that North America has, Canada and the US have enormous history in natural resource development, which is really the foundation of clean tech, R&D, and commercialization. And there's also opportunities, I think, in advanced manufacturing, as Jay had alluded to before. So recognizing that China is in fact a juggernaut, there are opportunities for regionalization, vertical supply chains closer to home. And I think that governments, industry associations, and companies will be looking at how that's accelerated in the months ahead.
Yeah, and again, Kevin, to the previous point, that's why agreements like USMCA are so absolutely important. And look, Ian, you're very diplomatic, and you've said a lot of great things about some of the investments that China has made and how they operate. Let me take a little different tact and point out that for manufacturers in America, it has been extraordinarily frustrating dealing with China. They have They have stolen intellectual property from our manufacturers. They have forced localization. They have dumped their products. They've subsidized their products. So they really haven't been operating on the same playing field that we have here in the United States. And that has disadvantaged us over time. And I think, we're going to be looking back years from now, and we're going to know what huge dark cloud that the pandemic cast over the entire world. But we're going to be looking for a few silver linings. One of those silver linings, I think, will be that we will have made a decision to bring some supply lines back to the United States. We are a global economy. We know that. We know that 95% of the customers reside outside of the United States. So we know we have to operate around the world as well. But I don't think we ever want to be in a position where we are so, frankly, subservient to other parts of the world for basic survival when it came, in this case, to PPE. There are other instances, though, where when we're talking about trade, we have to be very careful. I had a robust discussion with someone in the administration who was we were trying to get 60 million surgical grade gloves to Detroit and New York in May, I believe it was. It's having a robust discussion about why don't we make these in the United States? Well, we could, and as Ian suggested, we've enjoyed a low cost of doing business when we're making things in various places around the world. I don't know what a surgical glove costs. I'm assuming it's pennies. But one of the reasons that they're made in Kuala Lumpur, which is where we were trying to get them from, to Detroit and New York, is because we don't grow rubber trees in the United States. So, taking the basic input products that go into making the gloves and bringing them here, there's a lot of cost to that, and it would drive up the cost of that particular product. So it's a balance. We need to create some incentives to support the onshoring of manufacturing facilities here in the United States, including a tax credit. I want to see us provide incentives to help our companies recruit, train, and retain skilled workers. One of the things we haven't talked about is, we still have 650,000 jobs that haven't come back to us since the pandemic began. But ironically and paradoxically, we have 460,000 jobs that we can't fill. Ian talks about a lot of the robotics and technology that's going into manufacturing now. We need folks who can actually do those things. And so we need to provide those incentives. We need to support innovation, and we need to make sure that business loans and capital equipment purchases remain affordable. All of those things will help us grow manufacturing here in the United States and in the North America region.
Che, I couldn't agree more with everything you said, especially at the beginning in terms of the challenges that the United States and other free and fair trading nations have had in competing with some other jurisdictions. And I think it really leads to the importance of free trade and the fact that in our country we have, I think, 14 multinational trade deals with 55 countries representing about 1.5 billion consumers. And so the challenges that you articulated, I think, can be met halfway by having at least freer flow of goods and services between countries to enhance the supply chains in North America, which is absolutely the solution that you're talking about.
Yep, you're exactly right.
This is a very important subject, and I think so. I'm glad you get this discussion. Is very interesting as I listen to this. We move about almost 20 million shipments per day, and we'll see the global supply chain unfold in front of our eyes every single day, and we're seeing some trend changes, and we're watching it very carefully. Firstly, firms at the lower end of the value chain have already begun relocating supply chains as the Chinese labor costs grew. That's already happening. What is now happening is the process is moving up that value chain. And I've talked to several of our customers, and many of them are asking this question about China +1, +2, +3 strategies. And they're diversifying the source of electronic inputs. So markets like Vietnam and Cambodia and Bangladesh have already benefited from the early supply chain shifts. And now, more and more hearing India and Mexico. And we just talked about the USMCA, and so the whole notion of nearshoring or reshoring, those things are happening. Now, I think it's not that simple, but I think there is a bow wave of change potentially about to happen, and the supply chain shortening could continue as countries encourage firms to bring production back, just like we just talked about, to diminish the national security risk, increasing self-reliance, and so on and so forth. And so, anyway, this is a very dynamic area, and we literally see it in our transportation networks every single day.
Oh, absolutely. All right, Maria. Since glad to see you're back. Hope the connections are working. This is part of our challenges in this entire process. So if I was going to use the opportunity, Rajesh, and thank you very much. I was going to use the opportunity, particularly just once again, in talking about the issues and pressures on supply chains, to ask the question I was in the middle of asking you earlier, which is how have the various crises and pressures on supply chains particularly affected small and medium-sized businesses?
So I guess that means you didn't hear what I said before.
No, we did not.
Well, anyway, first of all, I wanted to thank you for including the topic of small businesses, because so often, we forget about the job creators, and small businesses create a majority of our jobs in the U.S. I used to brag at Cabinet when the president would boast that we had 78 months of consecutive job growth. I'd always say, but it's the small businesses that are delivering a majority of those jobs and create this vitality on main streets, as well as across American manufacturing, and the many that we're so proud of that have been able to scale and really define what America represents. So let me just say that. But let me just speak to what's taking place around the world. And that is that as small businesses try to navigate, what we saw was that they needed to expand their view of the market. And so we wanted them to be a little bolder and explore the international market. But our trade agreements didn't have a place in which they could resolve disputes, protect their patents, and have a way to navigate through these vast opportunities. 99% of the world's consumers are outside of the United States. And so it is important for the small business community to be able to partake of this. And so I was delighted that we were able to negotiate some really important agreements in those trade agreements, and that they were adopted by the current administration. And so now, for the first time ever in a trade agreement, we have an SME, small, medium enterprise chapter, and we have for the first time a chapter for women entrepreneurs. And so that's really great progress. So now what we have to think about is the infrastructure investments that other countries are making. What we're seeing is that as we have pulled back, that other countries have naturally taken an important role. I want to compliment this administration on understanding that it's important for us to address the China issue. What I regret, however, is that we're not working with our strategic allies. Unilateral sanctions sometimes don't have the effect of what total strategic allies could do collectively. So that's one of my regrets. Let me just say here domestically that what I do see is that small businesses, even still understanding the role that they can play, are still oftentimes thought of after the fact. When we rolled out the PPP, for example, our sole providers were left out of the first round because they didn't get the guidelines. They were received the guidelines about a week afterward. And so by then the funds were out. So I was delighted that Congress passed a second round for them. We know that after 30 days, 25% of businesses will not be able to come back online. After 90 days that they're down, we find that typically 50% of those businesses aren't able to come back online. So I think it is important that we think about not just loans, but actually subsidies, as we're doing for the large corporations. We need the small businesses. So many corporations, maybe Rajesh might attest to this, so many of the large corporations say that their R&D departments have diminished, and they've now expanded their M&A departments to be able to get the latest cutting edge technology, and that they need their supply chain to be able to deliver so many of the innovations that they're doing. So for all those reasons, I think that we have to think hard about the role that small businesses play and really prevail upon not just the federal government, but even localities to make sure that they're reducing regulation, that they're treating the small businesses as they should. And I'll just say this, I know that when I was traveling around, that I saw so many investments by the Chinese around the One Belt, One Road program. And so it is important for us not only to invest in infrastructure domestically, but to think about how we can continue to build bridges, figuratively and physical ones, around the world to make sure that we remain as the preeminent force in the world.
Thank
Kevin,
you,
I want Maria to actually go out on the road with me, because you're saying exactly what our members want to hear, Maria. 90% of the members of the NAM are small and medium-sized enterprises, and you brought up the PPE program, or PPP program, pardon me. And we need Congress to get off the stick right now, Kevin, with that. That program quit making loans in August, and there's a deadline of December 31st for using those funds. This pandemic is not going to be over by the end of the year. So we need Congress to act, and act quickly, or we're going to lose even more small businesses. Maria, while you were in no man's land technologically, I was talking about the number of small businesses that have had to close during this pandemic, 170,000. And 100,000 have already said they're not even going to reopen their doors. Think about what that does for the vitality of the main streets that Maria is talking about. Many of those are small and medium-sized manufacturers, and that will have an impact on the ability of manufacturers writ large to be able to navigate the future.
Thank you for acknowledging that. So many of our entrepreneurs have risked their life savings, their children's educational funds. And so I think it's also important to contemplate how we access capital. So not only do they need policies and programs, but they also need capital. And what I lament greatly is that right now, VC capital, as an example, is concentrated in 3 states and about 25 zip codes: California, New York, and Massachusetts. And we can do better than that, because we know that ideas come from all across the country. And so we want to make sure that businesses are all given an equal opportunity. So many times I see that our large investment houses think about how they're going to invest in the large cap companies. And so we have to find a way to get more capital investments into the small cap to make sure that we are still expanding the middle class and deepening democracy domestically, as I said, and abroad. Thank you for that.
One of the things I'd also like to build off of in that regard, and direct back to Rajesh, is that you talked about technology earlier on, and how, particularly for small businesses and for adapting in supply chains, how can data and technology help that adaptation? And what we've seen so far in this pandemic?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, I was listening. That's a very good conversation on small business earlier. I think I couldn't agree more on some of the things mentioned here. I mean, it's very, very critical for the future of recovery of the global economy, and especially here in the U.S. And we see it, we oft talked about the K-shaped recovery, that the smaller companies are the ones that are not getting the traction right now. But however, we just finished a survey, and I was happy to note that about 58% of the small customers we surveyed were optimistic that their revenues were going to increase the next year, which is honestly to be higher than what I thought it was going to be. But the other half of the equation, and not the other part of the survey, was around this notion of digital. And I think we almost heard uniformly from across the sector that there is a definite push towards digital transformation, and especially in the area of customer preferences. And they see technology as a very, very important tool to continue to operate through the pandemic, and then of course in the life chain, when it comes back to whatever the new normal is, that this is very important. 47% of the small businesses we surveyed said that they have already invested in new technology since the start of the pandemic, and expectations are only going to get higher as we go along. Now, from our own set of views, our company, we are thinking about digital transformation very, very differently during this period, and technology plays a much more important role. If you think about it, we are sitting on the world's supply chain data every single day, 20 million shipments going through our system, getting multiple scans to the system. There's a lot of data that we're sitting on, and to figure out how we're best able to help our customers leverage that information and data to be more successful is something that we are thinking very deeply about.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that you recall the report that I published when I was California Secretary of Transportation, noting the importance of a proper definition of infrastructure. Now all of a sudden, now that we're in this pandemic, more people are calling me about infrastructure concepts and investment opportunities and that sort of thing. But I remember when I first started, talking about infrastructure, trying to make it a little, quote, sexy, it was difficult. But I felt it was important to define the term because sometimes we all have a different definition of it. And so I think for a proper ecosystem that really supports trade, you also need to have the physical investments. And so you'll recall, Kevin, when I was in office, I made sure that up and down the state that we invested in double tracking, in grade separations, the Alameda Corridor East. And so I think these investments, also help the entire country, not just the small, but the mid and the large cap. And so I think we have to also, as we think about what I call enterprise risk management, ERM, we have to think about the internal challenges, but also the external challenges. So, when we were in office, we thought about the three types of challenges. One is, of course, what we're finding ourselves in is this global pandemic. Maybe that's redundant. Second is a cybersecurity threat, or third, a natural disaster. And so large cap companies are more able to draw upon their resources to address these issues, but the small and the medium-sized companies have a larger challenge. We have to make sure that as a country, as a community, that we think about all of those things that we have to invest to make sure that all of our businesses are able to thrive. And one of those is, of course, what I've said is to have a national priority. We've talked forever about the importance of the role that infrastructure investments play in job creation, but also in trade and everything else that our economy depends on. We take for granted that we can go to the grocery store and that there are going to be a bunch of apples there and berries and and pears that come from Peru and all over the world. But it's all because of the companies like Rajesh here on the phone, and so I'm so grateful to them for what they do to make sure that we exist in a healthy and nutritious way. But I think it's really got to be a national priority that we really urge whoever is in office. I've heard this administration currently in office say that it's very important for them to prioritize infrastructure investment. So I'm eager to see when that would happen. We'd like to see a proposal around that because it's so vital. We need to make certain that small businesses can get their materials to the large corporation. You referenced just in time a minute ago, and I can tell you when I was in corporate, we had these massive warehouses that we considered liabilities because we had to stock for 90 days ahead because we weren't sure when everything was going to arrive. And fortunately, I was delighted to see that once we studied back then, I'm aging myself, the Japanese talked to us about Kanban inventory and just in time. We turned these liabilities into assets by actually renting out the space to our vendors to say, if you can't get it to us at 2 o'clock, that's that fructose at 2 o'clock, well, then you can park it in our warehouse so that we can pull it out just in time. And so we're able to turn those liabilities into assets, which was a really, phenomenal thing that's happening. And now I'm seeing the beginning of the reverse of that because we haven't made the investments. So many companies are now saying that they're having to stock longer to make sure that they get their supplies in time. And certainly I know that at a personal level, we're all doing that. Every one of us, if we have a pantry, it is now full. And if we don't have a pantry, our closets are full with non-perishable goods because we don't know when the next supply will come in.
So Kevin,
thank you, Maria. Sorry. Jay, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say, Kevin, I just want to give 3 cheers again to Maria, because this issue is so vital. When we're talking about the future, if we're talking about what the economy is going to look like, what manufacturing is going to look like, what the world's going to look like post-pandemic, infrastructure investment has got to be right at the top of the list. And you're exactly right, Maria. We've been talking about this for decades. And I'll throw out a few of those statistics that we all know, or some of these data points that we all know, but that I think are actually really great talking points to encourage our elected officials to get off the stick and do something about this. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave us a D plus rating for infrastructure in the United States. A D plus? That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. We're ranked way behind our global competitors, 13th in infrastructure quality. That's a $3,400 hit for every family every year because of deficient infrastructure. And in just a few years, that number rises to 5,100. You talked about jobs, Maria, 11 million jobs for $1 trillion investment in infrastructure. That's critical. Here's another data point, 54,000 bridges in the United States, 54,000 that are structurally deficient. I drive my kids across bridges every day, and some of them are ranked deficient. And that just it's just mind boggling to me. I got to put in a plug for the NAM's Building to Win proposal, because it's available, by the way, at nam.org. And we talk about what's needed to fix our crumbling infrastructure. And again, it's not just roads and bridges, it's airports, it's inland waterways, it's broadband, it's 5G, it's pipelines between the United States and Canada too, Ian. All of that is so important. And we talk about the need for a $2 trillion infrastructure investment. And then, of course, the conversation stops, because who wants to stand up and talk about $2 trillion over, say, 10 or even 15 years? Well, guess what? We just pumped $3 trillion into the economy in the last 6 months without batting an eye, because we knew what we needed to do to help our economy thrive. $2 trillion over the course of 10 or 15 years, that's a drop in the bucket to what we have just done for our economy in a half of a year. We can do this. We need to hold everybody accountable. And I don't care who the president is. I agree with you, Maria. Whether it's a President Trump or President Biden, both of them have been talking about this. They need to put a plan on the table.
And if we're not enough by your point, if we're not enough.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Let Ian chime in for just 1 second, since he's been very patient.
No, thanks a lot, Kevin. We clearly could do another hour just on the infrastructure piece. It is so critically important, and I'm glad Maria articulated it so well, and Jay as well. Trade corridor infrastructure is the foundation for the future of supply chain reshoring or regionalization. Certainly in Canada, we're doing a lot on infrastructure to get our resources to market, both in Asia and to the United States, whether it's energy or oil. But there's also infrastructure pieces like high-speed rail that we need between centers like Vancouver and Seattle, or Toronto, Montreal, and New York. Those are infrastructure pieces that we have to think about as we contemplate more regionalization in our supply chain capacity. And the other piece, very quickly, on why the updated infrastructure piece is so important, is the other externality that is going to impact supply chains, and that is climate change. So with the enormous increase in the ferocity of hurricanes and typhoons all over the world that are affecting critical ports, airports, energy hubs, the focus on infrastructure can never, ever be overstated, because the climate change effect on supply chains is real today, and it's going to be a lot more real in 20 years' time, I think.
And if I can add here too, this is obviously we drive millions and millions of miles every single day, and of course, and the infrastructure conversation is very relevant to us. But let me, so I want to add to that conversation right now, then, to say we need to think about also, in addition to the hard infrastructure, some of the soft infrastructure. We talk about customers, and thank you, Maria. We're from customers, small customers in any one part of the world today are able to sell their goods and services to anybody else in the world because of the technology and then transportation systems like ours, the combination of the digital and the physical. And that infrastructure along with the soft infrastructure that's required, whether it is what it's going to take to drive technology, drive education, but also things like, clearance across borders. What are the tariffs? Of course, that's one thing. It takes a lot of conversation around that. But what are non-tariff barriers that we can eliminate, whatever the tariff is, to make sure that the goods can cross borders in a more seamless manner? So we need. I'll be very quick here because we already talked about the hard infrastructure, but let's not. I also want to bring in the notion that there's a soft infrastructure component to it that we should be thinking about.
Absolutely. And I will note two things. One is that over a decade ago, the Milken Institute actually partnered with the National Association of Manufacturers to do a report called Jobs for America. And one of the sections in that, which I actually was the lead author on in that section, was on the need for infrastructure investment. And none of the principles of that have changed. And it's good to hear it be brought up again. And I think it's for whether it is for SMEs, whether it's for manufacturing, whether it is for logistics, it's a key element, and it's a key element of the recovery. One thing, Rajesh, I do want to actually direct back to you in terms of what I would consider a soft element, but the infrastructure is essential on and in logistics, is that there's been a lot of talk for months about vaccines, and vaccines playing an essential role in protecting workers, stably affecting and creating a new a normal or a perceived normal for the economy. What is it going to take to get vaccines to the general public? How is and then for the others, how essential is this in many ways for businesses, for manufacturers, in making sure that people are perceiving an ability to go back to a more stable, slightly more open environment? So Rajesh, you could go first.
Yeah, no, thank you for that's of course it's a big topic for us. We are right in the middle of this. The most important thing is for the healthcare manufacturers to get the vaccine done, but immediately thereafter there is this huge logistical challenge to get those vaccines from the place of manufacture to the place where it's needed really across the world. So, this is a long topic, but I'll try to sum it down to 3 or 4 things. I think first of all and foremost, we need to have a network to move things from one part of the world to the other, and we have to get it everywhere. So it's a given that a network is very, very important to make it happen. So we connect 220 countries around the world, and I think that's going to be really critical. But that's not enough. We're going to have a method to move these under temperature control through that network. So we have those capabilities over time, and building on those ability to cold storage as required. Again, different vaccines that we're hearing now that have different requirements, and so we have to adjust to that. Ability to have dry ice, and able to use that. And so there are, in addition to all that, there's need of technology to provide visibility. And so we just literally launched, 6 weeks ago, even before the vaccines was even a conversation piece, something called Sensible ID, which is something that monitors, not only just where, proactively tells you where the package is, but also, monitors other parameters around that package. And then we are working with Microsoft to launch what's called FedEx Surround to be able to fully, on a real-time basis, view it. So it's a combination of our network, our technology tools, the cold storage, the ability to intervene as needed, and then working with the different authorities to make sure that these clear borders in a seamless manner. So there's a lot to this. We are right in front of this right now, and it's something that we pride ourselves on. We think this is going to be really, really critical over the next few months, hopefully, that we can get this done.
Great. That's great to hear. Jay, I can't hear you. Jay, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can I put in a good word for those pharmaceutical manufacturers who are going to hopefully be supplying hundreds of millions of doses to be distributed by FedEx and other carriers as well? They are moving at as fast a speed as possible to get these vaccines developed. we are all in the business community going to have to lead by example and encourage widespread usage of the vaccine, or we simply will not get the virus under control. And I will also say this, I am continually amazed and inspired by pharmaceutical manufacturers who every single day are engaging in research and development to cure the world's deadliest diseases. And obviously COVID is one of those. And I get pretty frustrated when both political parties tend to beat up on them and do what I think are unconscionable things like imposing price controls and other things that make them less competitive. So pharmaceutical manufacturers are companies that, frankly, we should be celebrating. We should be celebrating their successes. And we want to do everything we can to get this vaccine out to the general public and other cures in the future. And we don't want to have government impeding our progress and our ability to do so.
I just want to add, first of all, my compliments to the group for engaging this really important topic, and to the Milken Institute again for convening us. Let me just say that from my view, and remember that I was born in Mexico, in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. So I'm an American by choice. And so I love this country. It's given me so much opportunity. And I want to make sure that we preserve that. So I do get a little nervous when I see the Chinese, since 2013, when they launched that One Belt, One Road program I was referring to a minute ago, making huge infrastructure investments in other countries that are our strategic allies. And, it sort of, you concern yourself about what that relationship could ensue for the U.S. if they continue to make investments. And we have a win-lose point of view. So I think it is important that whoever wins this November, that we have a win-win view, that it's not a zero-sum game, because we have to have positive relationships. I mean, when I was in Estonia, and they, and the people there said, we look to the U.S. to protect us. We're concerned. We are facing the West. That's what we want to become. That is our view of the world. And wherever country you go to, I mean, they always have seen the U.S. as the stalwart, as the archetypical leader. And so it's important that we maintain this exceptionalism. And I do think that it is, by and large, by allowing people, individuals, families, to be able to take a dream, an idea, and be able to get some capital and scale it. That's the beauty of America. And so I want to see this country continue to flourish, and it will be in large measure with the strong partnership between our small, our medium, and our large caps. So to end with a compliment to the large corporations, to say how heartened I was when I saw them define their constituency in a new way, that it's not just the shareholders that are their primacy anymore, but actually their stakeholders, and that they're now looking to see what their supply chain looks like, what their communities look like, as well as their shareholders. And this larger view, I think, will make them stronger. I think that the new millennial generation is now looking to companies that are giving them strong returns, but also having environmental and social and governance advancements. And so I say that my story is possible because of this America. I mentioned that I was born in Mexico. I came here at the age of 5. And through the grace of God and the bounty of this country that has been so embracing of people who want to come and contribute, I've been able to go, as my grandmother said, I want you to go to the U.S. and somehow, you're going to be able to work in an office, although we've been migrant workers, and someday be a secretary. But she never imagined that I would hold office and to be a cabinet secretary. And that's the beauty of our country. And that's what I hope will continue to bring us all together and be one country, so that we can make sure that we're providing the other countries the leadership role that we deserve. And they deserve.
I love your story, Maria.
And Ian, I want to give one last thought from the beauty of Canada as well.
Just two very quick points on certainly on the pharmaceutical companies. I couldn't agree more with Jay on the importance of the work they're doing now. 10 of the largest in the world, of course, have significant presence in Canada, but every one of them is significantly expanding their R&D and commercialization footprint in Canada right now. That's a good Canada story. That's a good North America story. That's eventually reshoring to Canada as well as in the North American context. And the other very quick thing, Kevin, is ESG as a framework is going to affect supply chains going forward. If you're a manufacturer of consumer products, whether it's a cell phone or an EV car battery, your shareholders, your customers, your boards will insist that you're developing those products, supply chains, in sustainable jurisdictions. And that, again, is where I think there's going to be a significant acceleration of regionalization for those supply chains from Canada in the North American context.
Well, thank you. And I want at this point to note that we are indeed out of time. So we could talk tremendously about any of these topics that we've talked about, and several more that we haven't even gotten to. So I want to thank this wonderful and excellent panel. Thank you very much to all of you who are watching and listening. And we wish you the best of health, of safety, and prosperity in the midst of this pandemic, wherever you are. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists.